During a business trip, I got off the hotel elevator with a folder of reports in my hand and my head full of numbers. I just wanted to take a shower and get some sleep before another round of meetings. But what I found when I turned the corner on the 8th floor knocked me off my feet. I saw my wife. With another man. In the same hotel I was staying at. They were both laughing, carefree, her arms intertwined with his as if she were living a perfect romance. For a second, my brain tried to deny the obvious, as if I were just a stranger witnessing an ordinary couple, but all she had to do was turn her head and meet my gaze for everything to be confirmed. The smile disappeared. The color drained from her face like paint washed away by the rain. I stood there, motionless, with the world spinning slowly around me, and all I could say, in the strongest voice I had ever uttered in my life, was, "I'm here on a business trip and I find you with another man in the same hotel, it can only be ironic." She remained speechless, trembling, looking as if she wanted to disappear. He was disconcerted and didn't know where to hide his face. And before anyone could react, I continued, "Enjoy your trip, I'm already divorcing you." I turned my back and left, but inside, a part of me had died. The part that believed in her, in our story, in the forever we had promised. The following days were a blur of anger and lucidity. At the same time that I wondered how it had happened, I also understood that, somehow, all of this had been building for a long time. The veiled contempt. The absences disguised as commitments. The silences at dinner. But seeing her with someone else, blatantly, made me see clearly how much she had not seen me for a long time. She did not see me as a man, as a partner, as a husband. I was just the stability, the right name to say in front of the family, the safe shoulder to pretend we were living an ideal story. But I was no longer her ideal. I was the nuisance. The burden. The one who was there when she wanted to be somewhere else. And the worst part was not the physical betrayal. The worst part was the contempt. It was her consciously choosing to replace me with someone who did not even try to hide. Her lover seemed too comfortable in that role, as if he had already been introduced as the new chapter in her life. But what she did not expect was that I would not beg. Don't yell. Don't argue. I was tired of giving myself to someone who only knew how to demand. So I left. But I didn't leave alone. I took with me all that was left of my dignity, and a silent promise, she would never have a second of my attention again. At least not in the way she knew it. The news of the divorce exploded in her family like a grenade in the middle of the living room. Her parents called me in shock. Her sister tried to mediate. Her uncle came to me asking for explanations, as if I owed her something. But the truth, for all of them, was like a broken mirror reflecting who she really was. For the first time, they saw that it wasn't me who was failing. It was she who had turned her back on everything she pretended to value. The woman they had always thought was exemplary was now at the center of a scandal, betraying a man who loved her, who put her first, who worked tirelessly for that home. And then, alone, ashamed, she began to fall apart. The messages started arriving days later. Long, desperate, full of regret. Saying that she didn't know what she was doing. That she was confused. That she felt empty. That her lover was nothing like she imagined. And what was supposed to be a passion turned into a nameless void. But I was already gone. In the midst of my pain, I met someone. It didn't happen quickly, nor was it planned. It was a meeting of broken souls. Two people wounded by life who, little by little, found an unexpected peace in each other. Unlike the euphoria of the early days of my previous marriage, this new love was born from calm, respect, and silence that didn't need to be filled. And before I knew it, I was laughing again. Sleeping better. Making plans again. And it was exactly at that moment that my ex reappeared. She knocked on the door of my new life, begging to come back. She cried, got down on her knees, and said she should never have lost me. She said she had traded a real man for an empty illusion, for status, for cheap charisma. And that now she knew, with absolute certainty, that I was the love of her life. And, at that moment, I believed it. I believed that her regret was genuine. Because it was in her eyes, in her voice, in the way she trembled when she held my hand. So I forgave her. Yes, I forgave her. But when she asked me to come back, when she said in so many words, "Give me one more chance," I just looked her in the eyes and said, "It's too late." What she didn't know, and perhaps never imagined, was that the woman who was with me at that moment, the woman with whom I was starting over, was the same person who one day, years ago, had advised her to value myself. Yes, it was her. That friend who saw from the outside everything I tried to hide inside. The one who once told her, "If you don't see the man by your side, someone else will." The same one she ignored, who she looked down on with superior looks, thinking that her perfect world was unshakable. This woman not only saw me, but loved me at my worst. And I loved her back. And when my ex's betrayal exploded, she was the one who reached out her hand. Not to comfort me, but to walk with me. She was the one who gave me the strength to get up. And today, looking back, I realize that life has a cruel way of teaching its lessons, but it also has a poetic way of rewarding us when we choose not to destroy ourselves because of those who didn't love us right. My ex is still trying to understand how she lost everything. She still writes to me, calls me, watches me from afar, trying to recover something that no longer exists. She says she thinks about me every night. That she dreams about our wedding day. That she misses the smell of my books spread around the room. That she cries when she sees the cup of coffee I always used. But all of that is in the past now. A past that taught me that truly loving someone is not enough when that person chooses not to love you back. And the strangest thing of all is that, in the end, she herself was the one who pushed me towards the love of my life. The woman she despised, who she didn't think was up to competing with, was the one who showed me that true love doesn't shout, doesn't deceive, doesn't change, doesn't betray. True love lasts. And today, when I look into this woman's eyes, I see everything my ex wasn't capable of being. And I smile. Because deep down, I wasn't the one who lost. But the most surprising thing about this story is not the reunion with love. Nor even my ex's regret. The most surprising thing, is what she decided to do after she realized she had truly lost me. And that is something few would have imagined. It is this moment, unexpected and full of pain, that changes everything. Because there are things that not even the most genuine regret can fix. And what she did, well, you will only understand that when you know what really happened in the final chapter of our story. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any kind of betrayal. All the stories told are fictional, but carry deep emotional truths. The goal is clear, to show how betrayal can destroy lives, homes and true loves. Get ready, because what you're about to hear now is intense, shocking and will leave marks. Adjust your headphones, take a deep breath, and enjoy the story. His name was Daniel. He was a structural engineer, methodical, kind, and possessed a rare patience and calm that sometimes seemed to irritate the most anxious. He had worked for years at a civil engineering consulting firm, where he was respected for the poise with which he dealt with deadlines, teams, technical failures, and even inflated egos. He had a gift for resolving conflicts with well-placed words and silences. Outside the office, he was the kind of man who knew how to listen. One of those who remembers the little things, who holds the door open, who notices when the other person is tired. He was not given to grand speeches or theatrical displays of affection, but each gesture of his carried a firm intention. His love was stable, mature, and reliable, like everything he did. Laura was the complementary opposite. With a degree in public relations, she was always a magnetic presence. She knew how to dress with effortless elegance, her perfume was recognizable from a mile away and her laugh easily filled the room. Intelligent, articulate, shrewd in conversation and admired for the way she led any meeting with ease and mastery. She worked in corporate events and her name was associated with successful projects, brand launches, conventions and high-end receptions. She was admired in social and professional circles. She had an almost visceral need to be on the move, to feel alive through challenges and recognition. Her union with Daniel was seen as a perfect balance by those who knew them, rational and emotional, stability and drive, silence and brilliance. They met at a lecture on corporate sustainability years ago. She was organizing the event, and he was one of the guest speakers. Their first contact was professional and direct, but there was a silent tension that they both noticed. Laura was impressed by the calm control with which he delivered the speech, and Daniel was impressed by the way she managed everything around her without losing her composure. In less than a month, they were dating. In 6, they were living under the same roof. In 2 years, they were married. The ceremony was intimate and refined, exactly as they both wanted. A small rented garden, white flowers, soft music, and few guests. More important than the size of the party was what they were building, a life together based on trust, respect, and dedication. The house they chose was in a leafy neighborhood, far from the city center. A 2-story house with a simple facade, but with a cozy interior, decorated with good taste. Daniel built the bookshelf in the living room with his own hands, where her books would be mixed with his technical manuals. On weekends, it was common to see them preparing lunch together. She would chop the spices while he would take care of the meat on the grill. They had a light routine, between leisurely breakfasts, watching series on the couch and discussing where they would choose for their next trip. Each respected the other's space. Laura traveled frequently for work, spending days away at events and conventions. When Daniel was not at the office, he dedicated himself to reading, renovating the house and going for runs in the park. People saw them as an admirable couple. They had friends in common, and they attended dinners, birthdays, and family gatherings. He was the son-in-law any mother would want, and she was the daughter-in-law who charmed everyone with a simple good morning. Their families grew closer, created bonds, and visited their homes frequently. There was genuine affection between in-laws, brothers-in-law, uncles, and cousins. When the two appeared together at events, there were always looks of admiration and comments about how handsome, well-groomed, and respectful they were to each other. But what few people saw were the silent spaces that gradually began to form between them. They weren't fights. They weren't accusations. They were subtle silences, pauses in conversations that once flowed naturally, glances that quickly shifted away, and increasingly longer absences. Daniel didn't understand how her work was starting to take up more than just her schedule. It was starting to take up her thoughts, her weekends, her rescheduled vacation plans, her evenings that used to end with wine and conversation and now ended with an "I'm exhausted." He understood, or at least he tried to understand. He thought it was a phase. After all, the events she organized were growing, her clients were increasing, her visibility was expanding. Laura, on the other hand, felt that he had become too comfortable. That he wasn't moving at the same pace. That she was comfortable with a routine that, to her, seemed to be aging them. He started to feel that he lived more abroad than at home. But he didn't say it. He kept it to himself. Just like Daniel didn't say that he missed her. That he felt that, little by little, she was drifting away for no apparent reason. Despite this, there were still moments of harmony. Anniversaries that they made a point of celebrating, trips that happened even if they were late, dinners planned with love. There was still touching, there was still sharing a bed, there were still kisses, even if they weren't as long anymore. The two still liked each other. But they liked the version that once existed. Not the one they were living. And this created an illusion of stability that was sustained by convenience, by history, by commitment. Neither of them wanted to be the first to say that something had changed. Neither wanted to be responsible for dismantling the castle they had built with so much care. And so, they continued. Each with their absences and silent presences. Until Daniel received an invitation to speak at a conference outside the city. It would be a 3-day trip. He was excited. He saw it as a chance to breathe, to get out of the routine, to come back with new ideas. Laura encouraged him, smiled, wished him good luck, and said goodbye with a brief but sincere kiss. The night before the trip, the two had dinner together. She prepared his favorite food. They talked about the lecture, the audience, and the new contacts he could make. Daniel felt valued, just like in the old days. Laura seemed lighter, more connected. They slept hugging each other. For the first time in weeks, he fell asleep feeling like they were perhaps finding their way again. Little did he know that this would be the last innocent moment between them. The next day, he left with a peaceful heart. Bags packed, speech rehearsed, promises of evening calls. And Laura stayed. She went on with a full day, meetings scheduled, commitments that barely left room for lunch. At least that's what she said. From the outside, their lives went on as usual, occasional photos on social media, messages answered with emojis, sporadic participation in friends' get-togethers. But inside, each of them was in a different place. During the trip, Daniel tried to keep in touch. He sent messages, photos of the hotel, inside jokes. Laura responded with long intervals, short sentences, justifying it with the rush of work. He believed her. After all, that was what always happened when she was involved in important events. But something seemed different. The tone, the time, the absence. A difficult-to-name discomfort began to arise inside him, like an uncomfortable intuition that knocked on the door of reason and asked to be heard. But he ignored it. Because love, sometimes, is also pretending not to see. On her side, there was growing confusion. Conflicting emotions, misunderstood desires, dangerous impulses. There was a part of her that I still remembered fondly from the first years with Daniel. But there was also a part that screamed for something new, for something that would awaken what she hadn't felt for a long time. And, without realizing it, Laura was walking towards a line that should never have been crossed. But that was yet to come. It was still just a seed planted in the ground of doubt. What existed there, at that moment, was a marriage on hold. A story that still carried the name of love, but that was already beginning to change shape without either of them fully realizing it. While Daniel enthusiastically participated in the event, earning compliments and invitations, Laura was divided between tasks and thoughts. At night, alone at home, I looked at the empty couch and felt something I couldn't put into words. Was it longing? Guilt? Or just the awareness that something inside her had shifted, and that there might be no going back? She looked at the room, at the books on the shelf, at the coffee mug he always left on the sink, and felt a restlessness that grew day by day. He knew that somewhere between what they had experienced and what they had experienced, I had lost my sense of direction. But was it still possible to reverse it? Was it still possible to save what they had? Or was it already too late? The questions hung silently, like clouds about to collapse. Neither of them knew for sure what would happen when he returned from that trip. Neither of them knew that this would be the last time they would see each other with the same eyes as before. Because time, cruel as it is, had already begun to turn the gears of a destiny that would change everything. And what would come next, would leave deep scars. Daniel returned from his trip feeling light-hearted, with a sense of mission accomplished and a strange sense of peace within him. He had overcome his fear of the new, exposed himself to a demanding audience and reaped the rewards. He had spent the last 2 days immersed in meetings, exchanges and ideas that made him reconnect with parts of himself that had been dormant. He felt renewed, as if his absence had given oxygen to something that had been suffocated. On the way back, he imagined sweet reunions, a quiet evening, an improvised dinner with wine and stories about the days away from each other. He wanted to share, listen, feel at home again, not only physically, but emotionally. He picked up his cell phone and sent a message saying he would be home earlier than expected. There was no response. He imagined she was busy, perhaps involved in some last-minute project. That had never bothered him. Not yet. When he got home, the silence was the first thing that caught his attention. Everything was in its place, but there was a strange feeling, like when you return to a familiar space that no longer welcomes you in the same way. He dropped his bags in the corner of the living room, called for Laura, and again, no sound came in response. He climbed the stairs slowly, entered the bedroom, everything tidy, but there were no signs that she had been there recently. The bed was made, the light was off, and an absence that reverberated in the walls. He went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, saw plastic containers with untouched food, a half-opened bottle of wine, and a glass with lipstick leaning against the rim. Small details that spoke more than any explanation. Even so, he tried not to harbor suspicions. It was just tiredness, he thought. Maybe she was at a friend's house, maybe she had left in a hurry. Maybe. The next day, Laura returned late in the afternoon with a tired face and a formal smile. She kissed him with her cold lips, without delay. She said that the week had been chaotic, that she had barely had time to breathe. Daniel listened to her attentively, trying to absorb, trying to reconnect with what she was saying, but there was something in the tone of her voice, her posture, her eyes that avoided his, that made everything dense. She spoke as if she were present, but she wasn't. He noticed. He knew every nuance of her face, every pause between words, and it all seemed like a poorly rehearsed script. Still, he chose not to confront her. Maybe because he wasn't ready. Maybe because he still wanted to believe. The following weeks were a silent test of endurance. Daniel found himself quieter, more observant, attentive to details that he had previously ignored. Her perfume had changed. The change in schedules. Her cell phone was always face down. Her outings were justified with vague terms. Her clothes were chosen with more care, even for simple meetings. Laura became an increasingly inaccessible presence within her own home. When they were together, there were specific conversations, generic questions, evasive answers. The connection that had previously been fluid now seemed forced, as if each was playing the role of spouse without knowing the right lines anymore. Daniel tried not to suffocate over it, but little by little, the silence became unbearable. One night, he came home early from work. He decided to surprise her with dinner, as they had done in the beginning. He prepared everything carefully, from the appetizer to her favorite wine. He set the table, lit candles, and dimmed the lights. He sent her a message. She replied that she was finishing up an appointment and would be home soon. He waited. For almost 2 hours. When she finally arrived, she hurried in, smiling nervously as she saw the scene set. She tried to justify her delay with a last-minute setback, but there was sweat on her temples, her makeup was slightly smudged, and an excitement in her eyes that had nothing to do with dinner. He said nothing. They sat down, ate, toasted. They talked about trivial matters. And Daniel, with his hand on his glass, noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. He noticed her eyes avoiding his. And an immense emptiness formed inside him, silent, absolute. It was that same week that something finally broke inside him. One afternoon, while rummaging through his backpack looking for a charger, he saw her cell phone vibrate on the counter. It wasn't something he usually did, but there was something there, an almost painful intuition. He picked up the phone, saw the screen lit up and a name he didn't recognize. It wasn't a saved contact, just a number. The message was short. Today was even better than yesterday. See you tomorrow. Daniel's heart stopped. He stood there, motionless, for several long seconds. He put the cell phone back in place, with the care of someone touching glass that was about to crack. He went up to his room, looked at the closet where her clothes were perfectly lined up, and realized that there was something he could no longer pretend not to see. The next day, he left for work without saying goodbye. He spent the day in silence, mechanically answering emails, taking care of pending matters, trying to keep his mind occupied. But his mind wouldn't shut up. At the end of the day, instead of going home, he drove to a small cafe they had frequented when they were first dating. He sat down alone, ordered a black coffee and sat there, staring out the window, reliving memories that now seemed like they were from another life. I was trying to understand at what point everything started to fall apart. I was trying to find an answer that would ease the weight on my chest. But there was none. The final confirmation would come 2 days later, and not by chance. Daniel was invited to a new business trip, a seminar with colleagues from other regions. At first he thought about refusing. But something inside him told him to go. As if this trip had a purpose that he did not yet understand. And he did. But this time, he did not tell Laura that he was going. He only said that he would spend the day in meetings and that he would be back late. At the end of the afternoon, he quietly boarded the hotel. The hotel was large, discreet, with dozens of floors and an elegant reception. When he got on the elevator, he expected nothing more than rest and silence. But when he arrived at the indicated floor, and got out of the elevator with his suitcase in hand, he saw the scene. Laura. Coming out of a room with a man. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a coincidence. It was her. Her hair tied up the way she did when she wanted to impress. The smile he hadn't seen in months. Her eyes lit up. She was laughing. Laughing in a way he no longer remembered. And then she saw him. She stopped, froze. The smile melted like wax in the sun. The man next to her hadn't noticed yet. Laura tried to hide it, tried to feign surprise, tried to search for words that didn't exist. But Daniel was direct. He looked her in the eyes and said, in a firm voice, "I'm here traveling on business and I find you with another man in the same hotel, it can only be irony." The silence that followed was the cruelest that had ever existed between them. Laura turned pale. She tried to say something, but her lips were trembling. And then he finished, without hesitation, "Enjoy your trip. I'm already divorcing you." He turned his back. He didn't run. He didn't tremble. He just walked back to the elevator with a firmness that surprised even him. His heart was tight, his throat was dry, but his soul finally understood what needed to be done. There were no more questions. There was no more doubt. There was only the cold realization that the love he believed he had preserved had long since disappeared on the other side. Laura stood there, motionless, as if the ground had fallen apart. Her lover tried to understand what was happening, confused, looking at her for some explanation. But nothing was said. Because there was nothing to explain. That night, Daniel didn't go home. He stayed at another hotel, far away. He spent hours in silence, staring at the ceiling, reviewing every gesture, every sign he ignored. He felt betrayed on a level that went far beyond the flesh. It was the breach of trust, the devaluation of his commitment, the disrespect for the history they had built. He felt pain, but he also felt a strange sense of relief. As if the weight of months, maybe years, had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He knew that this was still the beginning. That the consequences of that betrayal would reverberate for a long time. But something inside him was already starting to move in another direction. And little did he know that what he would discover next was not just betrayal. There was something else. Something that would change everything. Something that not even Laura would be able to hide for long. Daniel didn't answer the calls. Nor did he read the messages that were piling up on his cell phone. Whatever Laura had to say wouldn't change the essence. It was no longer about what she would explain, but about what he had already felt when he saw the scene with his own eyes. The end had already happened before the betrayal had even taken place. What came after was only confirmation of what the silence had been announcing for some time. Still, he knew he needed to face her. Look her in the eyes, not to ask for an explanation, but to put an end to it once and for all. That was why he agreed to meet her, after a week in which she insisted every day, with messages that ranged from desperate pleas to empty declarations, trying in every way to maintain a connection that she herself had destroyed. They met in a discreet, almost empty cafe. It was early afternoon, and the light coming through the window reflected a nostalgia that seemed to match the tone of their conversation. Laura arrived first, visibly shaken. Her eyes were puffy, her face paler, and there was an almost childish nervousness in the way she held the cup in front of her. When Daniel entered, she stood up, but he only nodded with a restrained gesture and sat down opposite her, in silence. She tried to smile, but her expression soon fell, swallowed by shame. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. The sound of spoons hitting each other's cups was the only noise between them. She broke the silence first, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if she was afraid of her own words. She said she didn't know where to start, that she never imagined she would find herself in that position, that she felt lost. Daniel remained still, his eyes fixed on hers, without looking away, without softening. He wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done, he wanted her to understand that this was not a conversation like any other. She spoke for a few minutes, stumbling over her words, trying to justify it with the tiredness, the confusion, the distance that they had both been feeling. She said that she hadn't planned anything, that she hadn't sought it, that it had simply happened. He heard everything, but didn't respond. He just waited for her to finish. When silence finally returned, Daniel took a deep breath and said, with a calmness that contradicted everything that burned inside him, that betrayal was not a stumble, it was a choice. That the worst part was not that she had been with someone else, but that she had allowed the trust to die in silence, while he still believed in something that no longer existed. Laura began to cry. The tears flowed uncontrollably, and she begged him not to give up, saying that she could change, that she still loved him. But nothing she said had enough weight to erase what he had seen. Daniel only repeated, firmly, that there was no more us, that she should move on the same way she had chosen to move on alone before everything fell apart. He stood up, left the payment on the table and turned to leave. But before he could take the first step, Laura called him urgently, almost desperately. There was something else. Something he needed to know. A shiver ran down his spine. For a moment, he thought about continuing to walk, ignoring it. But something in her tone made him stop. He turned slowly and looked at her. Laura lowered her eyes. She said that maybe it didn't make any difference anymore, but it needed to be said. She apologized again, said that she wasn't trying to win him back with this, but that it was a truth she couldn't hide anymore. She paused for too long, and then, with tears in her eyes, she revealed that the woman he was currently with, that woman who supported him, who was by his side when everything fell apart, who listened to him, who lifted him up, that woman, had been her friend. Not just a friend. She had been her close confidant, almost a sister. Someone who, years ago, had tried to warn her about the way she treated Daniel. A woman who, on several occasions, told her to pay attention to the husband she had, who saw his value when not even she herself could see it. And that because of that, she had cut ties, distanced herself, excluded him from her own life out of pure pride, thinking she was being judged, when in fact she was being warned. Daniel stood still. The revelation pierced him like a thin blade, cutting through layers of memory, perception, time. A succession of images appeared in his mind. The first time she met him, the way she looked at him, how she seemed to know him already, as if she had been waiting for that moment for years. The way she hugged him with such truth, as if she were healing something inside him. It all made sense now. Laura continued talking, saying that at the time she hadn't known how to deal with the truth she had heard. That she hadn't accepted being confronted with her coldness, with her ingratitude, with the way she had treated a man who deserved so much more. She said that when she found out that she and Daniel were together, she felt as if the universe had rubbed in her face everything she had lost. That it wasn't just the pain of seeing him with someone else, but of seeing him with the very person who had warned her about what she was about to destroy. And now, she saw that she had scorned two people who had only tried to love her sincerely. One as a friend. The other as a husband. Daniel sat down again. He was in shock. Not because of the revelation itself, but because of the depth of what it meant. That woman had been in his life before he even realized it. She had silently tried to protect him. And now she was there, by his side, like a shelter after the storm. Life had brought together two people who had been hurt by the same hand. And Laura, when she told him this, was not trying to manipulate. It was clear that she was devastated. But not because she regretted the betrayal alone. She was destroyed because she understood, with pain, that she had thrown away everything that was most pure and loyal that she had ever had in her life. Laura fell silent. She cried silently, her shoulders hunched. Daniel looked at her, but no longer with anger. What was there now was something deeper. A feeling of closure. He finally understood why he had such a connection with that new woman. It was not a coincidence. It was destiny. It was reparation. She stood up feeling lighter. She thanked him for telling her. She said she wanted her to find peace, but that what existed between them was now the past. And that he had already chosen the future. Laura nodded, without the strength to say anything else. She sat there, alone, reliving every conversation from the past with the friend she had expelled from her life. Now everything made sense. And what hurt the most was not having been left behind, but realizing that the love of her life was now in the arms of someone who, deep down, she had always known deserved more. Daniel left the cafe and walked through the streets with a new awareness. There were scars, yes, but there was also a freedom he had never imagined he would feel. And what was yet to come, was just the beginning of a new story. That night, Daniel walked slowly through the streets lit by old streetlights, his breathing rhythmic with the coldness of a decision that, although silent, had already been made a long time ago. What had happened in the cafe had closed an entire cycle of his life. Not out of revenge, not out of pride, but out of clarity. That final conversation with Laura had left no loose ends, no words swallowed. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he no longer owed anything to anyone, not answers, not tolerance, not one more try. And the strangest thing was that the weight he expected to carry after that simply didn't exist. What there was a strange feeling of silent justice, as if time had arranged all the pieces without him having to move a single one. There was no longer any anger. There was lucidity. And that was what freed him. The next morning, he woke up early. He looked around the new house he had moved into weeks before. The room still had open boxes, temporary curtains, and pictures leaning against the wall waiting for a place. But even so, it was more home than the old space he had shared with Laura for years. He went downstairs, made coffee, and soon heard the doorbell ring. It was her. Clara. The woman with whom he was building something new. When he saw her at the door, with her hair tied up in a mess, a wrinkled sweater, and that tired but sincere smile, he knew there was nothing left to question. This was his new reality. A simple, raw setting, without the embellishments that masked emptiness, but full of truths that welcomed him wholeheartedly. Clara entered with soft steps. She was carrying a bag of bread and 2 porcelain mugs that she had bought at a local fair. She said she wanted something that symbolized a new beginning. They laughed together. They sat at the table, which was still improvised with 2 different chairs, a vase with fresh flowers, and piles of books that she helped organize. He told her about his conversation with Laura. He was honest. He detailed what she had said, what it meant, and most importantly, what it revealed about the past of the 3 of them. Clara listened to him with deep attention. She didn't interrupt. She just listened with her whole body, her eyes fixed on his, and her breathing slowed. When he finished, she simply took his hand on the table and squeezed it firmly. She said she knew that this moment would come, and that everything was okay. That there was no fear, no jealousy, no insecurity. That she had scars too, but that she was there not to erase what had happened, but to build on it. Daniel felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It was hard to imagine that someone could react with such maturity to such a delicate situation. And that was when Clara began to speak. For the first time since they began to get involved, she opened up a part of her past that she had kept silent. She told how she had gotten close to Laura years ago, in the first months of her marriage. She said that when she met her, she admired her intelligence and independence, but soon realized the indifferent way with which she treated her own husband. She tried to gently warn her. She said that Daniel was a rare man. That love is not built alone. That he paid attention to the details, to the little things he did, and that this could not be ignored. But Laura misinterpreted it. She believed that Clara was being invasive, perhaps even envious. And little by little, the bond between them broke. Clara said she had distanced herself out of respect. That she had never had any interest other than preserving what she saw as a valuable relationship. But after a while, fate brought them together again. Already far from everything, already hurt by different stories, they met again in a small cafe, where Daniel had gone after a particularly difficult day. It was supposed to be just a coffee, a casual conversation, a reunion of acquaintances. But there was something there. A mutual identification, a silent empathy, a connection that was born out of the fatigue of both. They began to meet by chance, then by choice. And before they knew it, they were exchanging confidences, laughing about trivial matters and feeling that, together, there was a safe space where they could just be. Listening to all that, Daniel was silent for a while. Then he stood up, went to her and hugged her tightly. He said that now he understood everything. That there were no more doubts. That what they were building was real, and that for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had found someone who saw him completely. Clara smiled with tears in her eyes. He said that she felt the same way. And that if their past was any good, it was only to show that they had survived previous versions of themselves. And that now, together, they could be so much more. In the days that followed, Laura tried to contact him again. She kept her tone respectful, but her messages had an almost ghostly weight. She no longer spoke of reconciliation, but of longing. She said she missed the smell of the house, the lazy Sundays, the conversations on the couch. Daniel read them in silence, but did not respond. He kept her words as if they were echoes of a life that no longer existed. He knew she was not trying to reverse the facts. She was just trying to deal with her own absence. With the loss. With what she herself had thrown away. And he, in turn, was beginning to understand that the greatest revenge was simply to move on. To be happy. Not out of spite, but because he deserved it. One day, while walking with Clara through a park, they saw someone familiar in the distance. It was Laura's sister, who recognized them immediately. He approached them, greeted them with genuine surprise and unexpected affection. He said he was happy to see him well. And, with a deep look, he whispered that the whole family knew how hard he had tried to keep that marriage going. That no one there blamed him. That Laura was dealing with the consequences of choices she herself had made. Daniel simply thanked him, without any resentment. That was enough to understand that even those on the other side now saw the truth. In the following months, life began to settle into new forms. Clara and Daniel began to share their space more regularly. They organized the house, adopted a stray dog, and planned a short trip to celebrate what they were building. There was no rush, no pressure. There was sharing. It was different from anything Daniel had ever experienced. Clara didn't try to mold him. She simply accompanied him, with firm steps, side by side. Sometimes, all it took was a look and he knew what she was thinking. At night, before going to sleep, he would look at her and feel a peace he had never known. There was no need to prove anything, to fight to be seen. With her, he was. He simply was. What had once seemed like an impossible trauma to overcome was now just part of the road. And what impressed Daniel the most was that, even after everything, he had learned not to close himself off. He had allowed someone new to come in. He had relearned how to trust. And that, for him, was more powerful than any reparation. It was growth. It was maturity. It was love. Laura, on the other hand, withdrew into herself. She began to live more discreetly, avoiding commonplaces, preserving the little dignity she still had. She tried to get back on her feet on her own, seeking to re-establish old ties, rebuild broken bridges. But there were marks on her history that she knew would never be erased. And the biggest of them was having lost the only man who truly loved her completely. Now, all she had left was to accept it. Live with it. And who knows, maybe one day, learn from it. Daniel finally understood that life does not give us immediate justice. That answers do not always come when we ask for them. But that, if we have the courage to move forward, life will put everything in its right place. And now he was exactly where he should be. With the right woman, at the right time, experiencing the kind of love that he once thought he would never find again. The weeks that followed the revelation and the settling of accounts were marked by a different kind of silence than the one experienced in the past. No longer the silence of someone who avoids, represses, or omits, but the comfortable silence of someone who can finally rest from the versions that he has tried to maintain for so long. Daniel no longer felt the need to explain anything to anyone. The people around him gradually began to understand the contours of the new phase of his life. Friends who had previously only appeared on the weekends now appeared with sincere frequency, with honest conversations, with smiles that did not hide judgments. Relationships that had previously been marked by appearances began to filter naturally. He was no longer a man tied to the idea of maintaining an image, but rather someone willing to live deeply what was left of his truth. He began to seek pleasure in simple things. He learned to cook new dishes, read books that had previously rested on the shelf only as ornaments, decorated rooms with objects that had meaning and not just aesthetics. Little by little, he transformed the new house into a home, not just in structure, but in soul. Clara accompanied him with the lightness of someone who understands that rebuilding is not about erasing, but about respecting what came before. She did not compete with memories, did not demand forced overcoming, did not rush wounds to close quickly. On the contrary, she respected the other person's time with the same sensitivity with which she treated her own scars. Their conversations became deeper. They no longer talked only about what they liked, but about what hurt, about what still moved them, about the unexpected triggers that arose on ordinary days. She knew when his silence asked for space and when it asked for a hug. And Daniel, for the first time, understood what it was like to be welcomed without having to justify himself. While he was building this new, solid and emotionally honest foundation, Laura was facing the consequences of her own choices with increasingly raw lucidity. It wasn't rejection, it was an echo. An echo of herself, of everything she had failed to take care of everything she had neglected when there was still time. Daniel's absence wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. He had been a pillar not only in her marriage, but in her life as a whole. And now that he was no longer part of her routine, the voids became more evident. I had connections, I had beauty, I had status. But I no longer had a presence. The one that occupied her mind in moments of silence was precisely the one she had despised for so long. And the cruelest thing was realizing that, even though she regretted it, there was no room for return. The door was only open to remembrance, not to reconciliation. Laura began to relive moments of her life with him almost obsessively. She rewatched old videos, reviewed archived conversations, and reread notes he had left her on small occasions that she no longer remembered. Everything seemed to scream a truth that she had previously refused to hear: love is not sustained solely by social admiration, but by intimacy that resists everyday life. She tried to get involved in new relationships, meet new people, and reconnect with old friends, but everything seemed superficial. Nothing had the weight of truth that it had with Daniel. And when she realized that he was with someone she herself had pushed away, the weight of regret became even more unbearable. Daniel, on the other hand, was dealing with a quieter dilemma. His love for Clara was growing, but there was an emotional remnant that still needed to be faced. It was no longer about desire or longing for Laura. It was something else. It was the impact of the betrayal on his way of trusting the world. At times, even when he was happy, he found himself questioning his intentions. He looked at the attitudes of the people around him with a caution that had not existed before. It was as if the wound had healed on the outside, but it still burned on the inside, in deeper layers. There was one day in particular when this conflict exploded into words. They were at home, Clara had prepared something special for dinner, and he arrived tense, distracted. He sat down at the table, but did not eat properly. She noticed. She questioned him gently. He hesitated, but then confessed that, as happy as he was, there were still times when he felt insecure for no apparent reason. He said that sometimes he doubted even good things, as if he expected something to fall apart at any moment. And that this had nothing to do with her, but with everything she was exposed to. Clara listened in silence. And with a calm look, she replied that it was normal. That no one comes out unscathed from a breach of trust. That loving after pain is in itself an act of courage. And that he didn't need to be there all the time. That she was also there to support him when he couldn't. It was one of the most intimate moments they shared. Not for romantic reasons, but for truth. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is not saying that everything will be okay, but accepting that it might not be, and still staying. In this rhythm of emotional reconstruction, something also changed in the way Daniel saw his own value. He began to give lectures not only on engineering, but also on ethics in human relationships within the professional environment. He began to write texts, short essays, where he spoke about overcoming, about starting over, about the importance of listening to intuition. He became a reference for others who were going through phases of breakup, loss, reconstruction. He was no longer just a respected professional. He was a man with a story. And people felt this in the way he spoke, the way he looked, the way he positioned himself. And silently, he knew that all of this was only possible because he did not allow himself to become hardened. Because even after being betrayed, he chose not to become bitter. At the same time, Clara received an unexpected invitation. A childhood friend was organizing a foundation to provide emotional support for women in crisis after divorce and marital betrayal. She would be one of the coordinators of the Listening and Support Center. At first, she hesitated. She thought she wasn't ready. But Daniel encouraged her. He said that there was no one more capable of accepting these stories than someone who had gone through everything with such dignity. And so, the two of them, each in their own way, began to transform pain into support, wounds into empathy, and failures into foundations. But the moral dilemma remained alive and pulsating. In the midst of all this construction, there was a question that Daniel still could not answer easily: what if he had forgiven Laura? What if he had tried to rebuild with her, despite everything? Would it have been possible? Would it have been fair? Sometimes, when hearing similar stories in lectures or in the services provided by Clara's foundation, these doubts returned as passing ghosts. Not because of regret, but because of reflection. Life had presented him with a difficult choice. Moving on was his salvation, but also an emotional sentence. Because forgiving did not mean erasing. Forgiving meant remembering without pain. And that, for many, is more difficult than taking revenge or forgetting. At the same time, Clara was also facing her own shadows. Even though she didn't show it, there was a silent fear in her that one day it wouldn't be enough. She knew that Daniel loved her, but sometimes she feared that, in some remote part of his soul, Laura still occupied a symbolic space. A kind of nostalgia that, even without desire, still had power. And this, although it wasn't verbalized, hung in the air at very specific moments. Like when he would become silent when listening to certain songs, or when he would look away when asked questions about the past that demanded answers. But she chose to trust. She chose to believe in the present that they were building day after day. And so, while each silently struggled with their own ghosts, the relationship grew stronger not in perfection, but in the conscious choice to continue. They were together not out of dependence, nor out of illusion, but because of a mature decision to build something based on truth. And this truth was not simple. It was full of nuances, of crossed memories, of experiences that still echoed. But it was a shared truth. And that made all the difference. The past, although present, no longer dictated the rules. It was just a book that, despite being painful, had already been closed. The present was different. And the future? Well, it was taking shape with slow but firm steps. And what would come next would be the culmination of a journey marked by pain, but also by redemption. The end of a story that was born from the breakdown, but flourished in reconstruction. And that was now heading towards an outcome that was as impactful as it was necessary. Autumn arrived silently, bringing with it a cooler breeze and orange tones that spread across the sidewalks as if the entire city was going through a transition similar to the one Daniel was experiencing inside. It was strange how the seasons seemed to align with internal cycles, and he felt this every time he left the house and looked at the dry leaves accumulated in the yard. It was a time of detachment, but also of transformation. His steps were no longer hurried, his choices were no longer urgent, and his gaze, previously full of doubt and restlessness, now remained calm, even when he went through uncomfortable memories. Clara had gone out to one of the foundation meetings and he took advantage of the silence in the house to reorganize old photo albums that were stored in a dusty box in the closet. He didn't know exactly why he decided to go through them, perhaps on impulse, perhaps because he missed himself. There were images there of such diverse moments, some with Laura, others alone, and some from childhood, that seemed to belong to another life. Leafing through one of the albums, he found a letter folded between two photos. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Laura's, written on a wedding anniversary years ago. He read it carefully, realizing that even then there were sentences that now rang false, as if written for appearances rather than to express what he truly felt. He folded the letter again and, without heaviness, threw it in the trash. Not out of contempt, but out of completeness. He no longer needed to hold on to memories that no longer served a purpose. That same week, Clara was called to give a lecture in another city, and Daniel, for the first time in months, would be alone for 3 days. She looked at him before leaving with a slight smile and said she felt confident enough to leave him alone. He laughed, told her she could go without worrying, to enjoy herself, and promised to take care of the house and the dog. After she left, he felt the silence again. But now, it was a different kind of silence. One that no longer bothered him. He spent his days organizing things he always put off, taking care of the garden, doing some repairs and rediscovering small pleasures like cooking for himself, listening to music while drinking coffee and watching old movies on the living room couch. At night, he wrote short texts, almost chronicles, where he talked about choices, about dignity in ruptures, about how time has a curious way of healing us through the cracks. He received messages from Clara at the end of the day, with photos of the event and details of his routine outside the house. He responded with affection, but without the anxiety that made him check his cell phone every 5 minutes. There was stability, and with it, a peace that he had finally found. On the second day, he decided to walk to the old city center. I wanted to revisit some of the places I used to go to when I was still married. Not out of nostalgia, but out of a desire to face head-on everything I had previously avoided. He entered a small bookstore, smelling of new paper and freshly brewed coffee. He greeted the owner, who recognized him, and exchanged a few quick words. He walked through the aisles attentively, as if each title could offer him a new piece of understanding about life. He bought 2 books, one on practical philosophy, the other on emotional reconnection. When he left, the sun was already setting and a light breeze made him close his eyes for a few seconds. He felt present. Truly present. And it was then that he saw her, from afar, crossing the street with slow steps, in a light overcoat and a blue scarf tied around her neck. Laura. She didn't see him right away, but when their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. There was no drama, no sudden change in expression. Just a calm, resigned recognition. She approached, hesitantly, and he remained where he was. When she was a few steps away, she smiled shyly, almost embarrassed. She said she hadn't expected to see him there. He replied that he hadn't expected it either, but that it was good to see her well. Laura told him that she was trying to rebuild some things, that she had gone back to teaching, that she volunteered in a social project and that, little by little, she was learning to be alone. Not with bitterness, but with purpose. She said that she still thought a lot about the past, but that she no longer victimized herself, but rather learned. Daniel listened attentively, with respect. And after a few minutes of casual conversation, she sighed deeply and asked if he was happy. He smiled, without hesitation, and said yes. That he felt at peace. And that he had found someone who truly saw him, even in the parts that he thought would never be understood. Laura smiled with tears in her eyes. She said that this was what he had always deserved. And that, as painful as it was, she could now accept that she had lost him to someone who knew how to love him better. The conversation didn't last long. They said goodbye with a light wave. There was no touching, no promise of friendship. Just a dignified, mature ending. Daniel went home with a calm heart. That night, when Clara called, he told her about the meeting bluntly. He said he had been respectful, that she was fine, that they had talked like two adults who no longer hurt each other. Clara listened to him in silence and then responded with a simple, "Thank you for telling me." That was the basis between them. True, even when it wasn't comfortable. The next day, Clara returned. She brought a different energy, full of enthusiasm for what she had experienced at the events, for the connections she had created, for the new ideas she had brought to the project. They talked until late, made plans for a short trip in the coming weeks, and fell asleep hugging each other, with their feet intertwined and their bodies aligned as if telling each other that, despite everything, there was still so much to live for. Time passed. The changes solidified. Daniel published a book with the chronicles he had written during the reconstruction process. The book was well received, not because of its elaborate style, but because of its authenticity. He received letters from people who saw themselves in his texts, who were moved, who found strength where before there had been only darkness. He was invited to events, debates, interviews. But he never let it go to his head. He remained the same man of simple habits, who preferred late afternoon chats on the couch with Clara to any social cocktail party. She, in turn, expanded her work at the foundation. She created a special center for couples in crisis, developed mutual listening methodologies, and became a reference in the field. They were admired not as a model couple, but as an example that it is possible to rebuild without erasing the past. One cold night, the two of them were sitting on the porch, each with a glass of wine, blankets on their legs and a dog sleeping at their feet. They talked about the possibility of moving to another city, of starting over in a quieter place, closer to nature. Clara mentioned that she would like to open a retreat center, something small but cozy, where they could offer emotional healing experiences. Daniel liked the idea. He said he could help with the structure, with the workshops. They made plans. They laughed. They dreamed. And in that moment, they realized that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, not because fate spared them from pain, but because it gave them the courage to face it head-on. When he looked at Clara, Daniel knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never have experienced that love if he had not gone through what he had. And he understood, then and there, that some losses are necessary for life to lead us to what really matters. Because sometimes, everything has to fall apart so that we can finally build something worth living in. And what they were building together was more than a love story. It was a daily choice, a commitment to the truth, a silent promise that they would never be neglected again. Not for lack of love, but for an excess of awareness. And this awareness was what made everything possible. The decision to move did not happen overnight, but was gradually born, fueled by nighttime conversations, by a silent mutual desire to finally leave the past behind, not only emotionally, but physically as well. Daniel and Clara found a small town surrounded by mountains and dense vegetation, where time seemed to pass more slowly and people still exchanged kind glances on the streets. There, they began a new cycle, inaugurating the retreat space that had previously been just an idea amid smiles of wine and blankets on the porch. The place was not luxurious, but it overflowed with authenticity. Simple rooms, gardens with wooden benches, a large room for meetings and emotional sharing. Every weekend, they welcomed couples, individuals in search of meaning, a new beginning, a breath of fresh air. And it was there, in that scenario of reconstruction, that Daniel finally felt whole. The following months brought unexpected results. The project grew, gained notoriety and began to welcome people from different regions, some who knew Clara and Daniel's story, others who were simply guided by the energy that the place emitted. But the most impressive thing was to see how the stories that arrived there, so often similar to theirs, were transformed by the honest and empathetic gaze of the two. It was as if the pain of others bowed before the truth that they represented. And this, more than success, was purpose. It was healing being shared. And in this space, each of the two found more than fulfillment, they found peace. Laura, on the other hand, followed a solitary path. She continued teaching, got involved in social causes, and seemed fine on the outside. But something inside her was never the same again. Not just because of belated regret, but because her awareness of her own choices became clearer with each passing year. She had opportunities, encounters, new paths, but in all of them there was something missing that she knew she would never find again. She tried relationships, yes. Some lasted weeks, others months. But none managed to touch the depths of her soul like Daniel once did. And it wasn't because he was perfect. It was because he had loved sincerely, had given the best of himself without reservations. And when he realized he had lost that, it was too late. What she took for granted proved to be fleeting. And the woman who had once lived surrounded by status and self-confidence now walked with the serenity of someone who had learned, the hard way, the value of what one has before losing it. There was one day in particular that marked the end of their story. Years later, Clara and Daniel decided to write a new book together, this time not just chronicles, but reports, real stories of people who went through the retreats and allowed their experiences to be told. The book was a success. And at one of the book's signings, in a distant capital, Laura showed up. She was different. Thinner, with short hair, a sweeter but at the same time more subdued look. When she approached the table, Daniel recognized her immediately. Clara, with the sensitivity she always had, simply stepped aside discreetly so that the two could greet each other. Laura was holding a copy of the book. She didn't say much. She just held out the object for him to sign. He wrote a few words, "To someone who was part of a story that taught me the value of true love. May life take you where your heart deserves to be." She read it in silence, nodded with a slight smile, and left. She didn't cry. She didn't try to say anything else. Because they both knew that there, at that moment, everything had ended with the dignity that had not always been present between them. On the way back home, Clara asked if he was okay. He said yes. That night had actually brought relief. It was as if, finally, all the chapters had been written. There was nothing left to say. And the most beautiful thing was that, despite everything, there was no hatred. There was learning. A learning that transformed them. And that, now, was also shared with the world. In their new home, far from the noise of the past, with large windows overlooking a landscape of mountains and green fields, Daniel and Clara continue to cultivate their love with the patience of those who have known pain and know the value of calm. They adopted a second dog, renovated a shed to receive more visitors, and began planning a new wing of the retreat, a space for children of couples in the process of separation, where they could express their emotions without fear. Clara became pregnant months later, to the surprise of both, even when they already believed that this possibility no longer existed. They received the news with tears and laughter, as if they understood that life holds its own mysteries. And when the baby was born, they brought into the world not only a new life, but a new cycle of love, now based not on the promise of the beginning, but on the firmness of a new beginning. Laura, upon hearing the news, did not try to contact anyone. She simply sent a card with a brief and sincere message. "I hope this child grows up surrounded by the same peace that you have managed to build. May he be happy, because he will have the best parents a human being could have." Clara read it out loud. Daniel listened in silence. And for the first time, he allowed himself to feel deep compassion, not out of pity, but out of humanity. Because sometimes, people change. They only change too late. And that is a pain that time cannot always erase. The story then came to an end. Not an abrupt end, but a careful conclusion, like a book that was read carefully until the last page. Daniel continued his life alongside Clara, building, day after day, a love that was born from the rubble, but that flourished with deep roots. You learned that true forgiveness is not forgetting what was done, but allowing it to not define you. That loving again is possible, even after being betrayed, if you have the courage to allow it. And that sometimes, people's biggest mistakes are also the greatest catalysts for growth. Laura, on the other hand, lived her journey in a more solitary way, but still found ways to re-signify. She became someone more human, more aware, lighter. She never loved with the same intensity again. But she began to love more truly. And although this was not enough to repair the past, it was enough to keep her from losing herself. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Do you think Daniel made the best decision? And Laura, did she deserve a second chance, or did she pay the fair price for the choices she made? Leave your opinion in the comments, we really want to know what you think. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more impactful stories like this one. Each story brings a new lesson, a new point of view, a new emotion that can make you reflect on life in a different way. And remember, cheating destroys more than just relationships. It breaks homes, tears apart bonds, and erases possible futures. In many cases, those who cheat not only lose the other person, but also the best version of themselves. And that's why, here on this channel, we do not support any type of cheating in any way. Until the next story. May it touch you deeply as this one did.